Our next teller is a former Des Moines police officer, former Polk County sheriff. He's taught at the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy. And let me tell you, he's never late, which I'm fashionably late, so I always have to apologize to Mike Nehring. Please welcome Mike Nehring.
October 1st, 1976, I was a rookie Des Moines police officer. I had just got out of the police academy. I'd been out 3 months. During the police academy, I got the highest academic achievement award in the academy. I was also a recent graduate of the University of Iowa, and I was all about serving my community and making my mark on the world. My father had preceded me on the Des Moines Police Department, and he had attained the rank of sergeant. So my name was well known, and I was off to a great start. I was working with another officer in a very challenging assignment. His name was Jim. He was 6 years my senior. Our patrol beat was a beat that had highly diverse population. It was a transient population. We had high rates of crimes against persons. There was a lot of prostitution, and there were a lot of drugs. It was just where I wanted to be. That night, on the 11 to 7 shift, we started off slow. We made a couple of traffic stops, we issued some warnings, and I was thinking about taking off a couple hours early because I intended to go to the Iowa-Indiana football game the next day, and I could get a couple hours sleep. I was also getting a little hungry, and I was really looking forward to our next coffee break at Dunkin' Donuts. Yes, folks, cops do eat donuts. That night, at about 1 a.m., we get a trip to a phone booth at 17th and Crocker. How many people out there remember phone booths? For those of you that don't, that's where Superman goes to change into his flight suit when he gets a trip. So we are advised by the dispatcher that there are 2 female runaways at the phone booth, and they are being harassed by a couple of male adults. We were very close, and we got there quickly. We drove by the scene, and I noticed there was a gold Lincoln Continental with a white vinyl puffy top. Those of you that remember phone booths probably remember those as well. There was a tall, slender gentleman that was standing by the open door, passenger door of the car, between the phone booth and the car. There was a shorter man that was standing near the rear bumper of the car. I was driving. I flipped on the top lights, went down to the next intersection, pulled a U-turn, and pulled in behind. Jim got out on the passenger side and started talking with the taller man. I got out on the other side and started talking to the driver. I asked him for his driver's license and his registration. Back then, you didn't have to have proof of insurance. So when I got his license, I noticed that the name was that of a local pimp and drug dealer. I noticed Jim was playing 20 questions with the taller man because he did not have any identification. We subsequently found out that he was a local man with the street name of JoJo, who was wanted by our department for rape and attempted murder. We didn't identify him at the time, and Jim found out as much information as he could. He asked him to sit back in the car. He then went over to the phone booth to talk to the girls, see if they were injured, what had taken place, whether we had any charges on these individuals. At that point, I was horrified to find out, or to see, JoJo reemerge from the car with a .357 Magnum, and all I saw was muzzle flash as my right leg crumbled beneath me. The bullet took out, pulverized my femur bone. As I was going down, he hit me a second time here in the back. That round then exited here. He then turned the gun on Jim, and he hit Jim in the left hand and in the right clavicle. And then as he was going down, he hit him in the upper thigh. He then returned his attention to me as I was clawing my way back towards the portable radio that had went flying. And I'll never forget, he yelled an obscenity at me and shot me a third time in the center of the back. That shot was a 1/4 inch off my spine. At that point, I thought to myself, how cruel can another human being be? At that point, I passed out. Jim was now crawling back towards the patrol car, and he was able to get a hold of the fender and pull himself up. In time to see JoJo now kneeling at my head, lifting my head up by my hair and placing the revolver to my temple. Luckily for me, he had fired all 6 rounds and the revolver was empty. I regained consciousness with the warm, bright lights of the emergency room as they wheeled me in, and I saw them cut my uniform from my body and yank it away almost instantaneously. All modesty was lost, and I didn't care. A nurse pressed close to my ear and said, "Don't worry, you are safe now." At this point, my wife is being rushed to the hospital, and upon her arrival, she is advised that all of my blood vessels had collapsed and that in order to save my life, they were going to have to reestablish blood flow. I endured several hours of surgery. I had 14 holes in my bladder. I had to have several inches of my small intestines removed, and 10% of one of my kidneys is gone. I was in intensive care for 10 days without my family knowing whether I was going to live or die. But finally, there was improvement. 12 weeks later, I walked out of the hospital on crutches, and I began to rebuild my life. 8 months later, I went back to work on light duty. But I was damaged goods, both physically and mentally. I had lost all of my idealism and my faith in my fellow man. But in time, I recovered physically, and I went on to run a Drake Marathon. Mentally, it took a little longer. I lived daily with the pain of the slug still in my abdomen and the 50 fragments that were still in my leg. But there is an advantage. I can tell you just as accurately as Ed, Jerry Ann, or Curtis when it's going to rain again. Cops live with the daily exposure to society's most unsavory elements. They go to work each night knowing that there is a possibility that they may not return home at the end of the shift. But I was overdosed. My perspective was warped. I had lost all faith in my fellow man, and I trusted no one. But then a few years later, we had a couple of newspaper carriers come up missing. The first one in West Des Moines, the second one on the south side of Des Moines. These incidents had a tremendous impact on our community. After a few days, all leads were exhausted. There were no suspects. There were no witnesses. There were no more leads. The only thing left to do was search the immediate area around the crime scene for physical evidence and work your way out. And I mean way out, throughout the city. This was a tremendous undertaking, and we needed the help of the community. We asked for volunteers, and the outpouring of support from our community was dramatic. Hundreds of volunteers came out from all walks of life, all ages. We had entire families coming out to assist us with this search. We had church groups, we had Boy Scout troops, we had the Civil Air Patrol. Together, we searched some of the most rugged terrain in all of Polk County, looking for physical evidence. These people searched riverbanks, creek beds, backwaters, open fields, wooded areas. They endured grueling heat. There was dense underbrush, thorny bushes, poisonous plants, and insects. And they kept coming back. Some every day. One of these volunteers showed up on 2 separate days, and he was an older gentleman. Late 60s, early 70s. I recognized him right away as a public figure. He was definitely a person of import, but I couldn't quite put a name on him. This person sought no acclaim, and he went about the tasks presented to him with the vigor of a man a quarter of his age. This gentle soul was the Des Moines Diocese Catholic Bishop Morris Dingman. This man left his life of air-conditioned privilege to come out and do what he could, to minister to the flock, to provide encouragement, and to provide example for all of us. When we took a break, he was the guy that made sure that everybody had a bottle of water and a banana before he did. As we rested, it was almost biblical how people would gather around him to visit, particularly young people. He was like a magnet. This man will forever be in my debt. This altruistic spirit was reinvigorating for me. And it helped to rekindle in me the belief that we have good people in our community. The vast majority of the people in our community are good people. I came back to this realization, and yes, there are evil people out there, but there are also saints among us.